Right, let me start the screen share. Just do it. All right, so this is what we are going to start with: pollination and pollen precipitation. That is something which you might not get covered in the today's class, but something we'll be able to do that later. So that is something we're going to do. Now, before starting with the today's lecture, now I hope you are very much clear with what we have done in the last class. We have done with the female gametophyte wala portion. We have covered that. We have seen the how the embryo sac has been formed. We have seen what is my megasporogenesis. That is something we have covered. So I'm very sure that that is something you have very thoroughly understood, right? Now, if I ask you that what is my egg apparatus is made up of, so you have to raise your hand. What is my egg apparatus is actually made up of? Egg apparatus आपका किससे बना हुआ आपको मिलता है? बताइए तनिष.
The synergids and excentrics.
All right. Okay. Very good. Synergid and your egg is going to collectively make the egg apparatus. Right. Now tell me one more thing over here. Near the synergid cells, you will have something known as my finger-like projections. Those finger-like projections are called as something. And then you have to tell me what that finger-like projection is well known for. What is it has been known for? So again, for this, you have to raise your hand. Misbah, bataiye.
Filiform apparatus.
Filiform apparatus. And what is this filiform apparatus is known for?
Guiding the pollen tube.
Guiding the pollen tube. Very true. So that is something also you know. Very true. Right. If I ask you that what kind of ovule you get to see normally in the angiosperm. So ovules you have different type of ovule. You have a number of types, right? My question is simple, that in a general angiosperm, what kind of ovule you get to see? So again, you have to raise your hand to answer this. Are Gayatri kuch boliye? Gayatri, Aisha, you can also try. Simple. ठीक है. बताओ, Misbah, tell us. Type of ovule.
Macrosporangium.
No, ovule is called as macrosporangium. That is a different thing. I'm saying which type of ovule you generally get to see in the angiosperm. Tell us, Mantasha.
Anatropous.
Right, anatropous type of ovule is something I'll get to see in my particular, yes, in my angiosperm. That is something that is going to be the inverted one, right? Anatropous mein yaad rakhna, the macropyle will be facing towards the downward direction and chalazo line will be in the opposite side. Okay. Now let's talk about my pollination. So you know that is nothing but my transfer of my pollen grain. That is called as my pollination. So that is the only thing we have to understand in slightly more detail, right? The process of transfer of pollen grain from anther to stigma is called as my pollination. So transfer of pollen grain from anther to stigma is going to be called as my pollination. So that is something usually called as my pollination. So that's something you have to know, right? Now that can happen with the help of the wind. That can happen with the help of the insect. Sometimes even you can find some of the animals can be involved over here. Birds, mammals can be involved. So that is something we'll get to see. Now let's try to understand pollination in slightly more detail. So when you discuss pollination, the pollination will have like two categories. You will have something like your self-pollination and you will have something like your cross-pollination. Now, when we discuss self-pollination, you have two terms over here. You have a autogamy and you have a geitonogamy, right? Both are the example of my self-pollination. Now, self-pollination basically means what? Pollen grain coming out of the anther, falling on the stigma of the same flower or of another flower of the same plant. So two things can happen. Assume that you have one flower over here, right? And on that flower you have a anther. on flower, you will be having an anther over here. So from anther, the pollen grains are going to come out. This pollen grain, assume that this blue color pollen grain are going to come out, and they will come and fall on the stigma of a same flower. They come and fall on the stigma of a same flower. They come, this anther come and fall on the stigma of a same flower. If at all that happens, that is a very good example of my autogamy. That's a very simple example of my autogamy. That's an example of my self-pollination, right? And what happens in geitonogamy? In geitonogamy, what will happen? The pollen grain are going to come out from the flower and they will fall on another flower. They will fall on another flower, but of the same plant. So assume that this plant has another flower over here, right? This plant has another flower. So the pollen grain coming out from a flower A, assume that this is my flower A and this is my flower B. So pollen grain coming out of the flower A, if they come and fall on the flower B, stigma of a flower B, then that becomes an example of my geitonogamy. Now, the common thing between them is going to be whatever the seeds are being formed after this, whatever the offsprings have been formed after this, they are going to be genetically similar. They are going to be genetically similar. So offspring is genetically similar to the parent as pollen come from the same plant, because pollen are coming from the same plant. So you don't get to see any kind of variety happening over there, and you see that all the offspring which have been formed over here are going to be completely genetically similar to each other. So that is something you have to know. That is something you have to understand in terms of your story of my self-pollination. So you have autogamy and you have a geitonogamy. Something we'll see that in detail. Then you have a cross-pollination. Here what happens? From flower, the pollen grain are going to come out. They will fall on another flower of another plant. So here the pollen grain are coming out from the flower. So assume that you have one flower over here. So from here the pollen grains are going to come out. And now this pollen grain are going to travel either via wind or some other sources. And they will go and sit on the stigma of another plant, another flower. So they will go and sit on the stigma of another flower of another plant. So they will come over there, travel karke aayenge, and they will sit over here. Right? If at all that happens, that is example of my cross pollination. That is called as my xenogamy. So cross pollination can be also called as my xenogamy. Right? Offspring are genetically different to the parent as a pollen come from a genetically different parent. Obviously, here the variation can be seen. Here basically offspring which are being formed after this will be different from the parent population, because you are finding two different plants are involved. Two different plants which are genetically dissimilar to each other are involved over here. So that is why you will find genetically different to the parent offspring can be seen. Right? अब मुझे बताओ सेल्फ और क्रॉस में से ज्यादा बेनिफिशियल कौन सा होता है नेचर में? व्हाट इज मोर बेनिफिशियल इन नेचर?
क्रॉस।
वैसे ही अनम्यूट करके बता दो.
Xenogamy.
Right, xenogamy or cross pollination is going to be much more beneficial, much more advantageous by any means. That is going to be much more advantageous, right? So we'll try to see now all those things later. Okay. So now when we discuss autogamy, so autogamy generally have these two terms. So you have something like chesmogamous flowers and you have a clistogamous flowers. Okay. So when you discuss autogamy, so please remember one thing over here very clearly. When you discuss autogamy, you should know one thing very clearly, that the pollen grain is coming from the anther and falling on the pistil of the same flower. Right? That is my autogamy. That should be clear to all of you. The pollen grain mera nikla, pollen grain is coming out from the, if you are not able to understand, please remember this. The pollen grain is coming out from the anther and falling on the stigma of a same flower. So pollen grain यहाँ से इस anther में से निकल के आ रहा है, ये मेरा anther यहाँ पे. It will come from the anther of the same flower and will fall on the stigma of the same flower. That is your autogamy. So it will come and sit over here. Right? So it is coming from here, blue color, and they will sit over here. That is going to be the autogamy over here. Now you should know one thing, the flowers can be of my two types. Either you have a chesmogamous flower or a clistogamous. Now clistogamous means the flower will remain closed. They will remain in a bud state. Clistogamous flower means they do not open. The flower remain in the bud state. So they will remain closed. So flower remain closed. So flower over here are going to remain closed. Flower are going to remain closed. So basically you can see the bud over there. Bud आपको वहाँ पे दिख जाएगा और bud आपका बंद वहाँ पे बैठा होगा. Chesmogamous flower is going to remain open over there, right? So even though the flower is open, the pollen grain will fall on the stigma of the same flower. And in clistogamous, the interesting thing is there is no chance that pollen grain can fall somewhere else. if the flower remain closed all the time, then what will happen? The pollen grain will come out and will sit on the stigma of the same flower itself. चांस ही नहीं है कि कोई और जाके गिरेगा. तो क्लिस्ट्रोगैमस के अंदर तो आपको 100% ऑटोगैमी मिलता है. इसमें तो लाइक यू विल हैव 100% self pollination will be seen over here. 100% self pollination is seen. There is no chance that my pollen grain can come and sit somewhere else. But I can find the same thing. I can find some chances are there in chesmogamus that because of wind, my pollen grain might go somewhere else, right? So that is something you have to know. These are the two things. First of all, you have to remember here, right? So here, what is happening? So from the stamen, the pollen grain are actually coming out, right? This pollen grain and sitting on the stigma. Now you tell me, what is this? It is a clistrogamy or chesmogamy? Tanish, batao.
Clismogamy.
Chesmogamy. Clistrogamy में it will be in a bud state, right? So chesmogamous condition will be seen over here that the stamens में से आपका यहाँ पे pollen grain निकल के बाहर आ रहा है और ये आके आपका गिरेगा आपके stigma के ऊपर and the flower is open. You can see the flower is open right now and it is falling over there and will lead to a self pollination. So that is going to be my chesmogamous type of my condition. Okay. चलो आगे देखते हैं. Let's see. So Aditya is not there in the class now. Okay. All right. Now, some plants such as Viola, Oxalis, and Camelina produce two types of flower. They are known to produce two types of flower. Chesmogamous flower. These flower which open and are similar to flowers of other species with exposed anther and stigma. So these flowers are going to be like similar to the other flowers with the exposed anther and stigma, right? But also remember this thing that Viola, Oxalis, and Camelina are also the example of my clistogamous flower as well. They also become an example of a very good example of my clistogamous flower. So that is something also you will see. They are also going to be an example of my clistogamous flower. So they become an example of both the things, chesmogamous as well as clistogamous. You'll see that now. So that is the chesmogamous flower का यहाँ पे उन्होंने open कर दिया हुआ है आपका picture. Now see. What is my clistogamous flower? These flowers do not open at all. So these flowers are going to remain closed all the time. They are not going to open, right? Now there are going to be some benefits over here. There are going to be some benefits over here. Now let's try to see some benefits in this. See, when I talk about, when I say clistogamous flower, when I say clistogamous flower, now you tell me what can be the advantage of such kind of pollination. So first of all, you know that it is always going to be 100% self pollination will be happening over here because the flower remains closed. You know that the flower is going to remain the closed over here. Flower remains closed. So यहाँ पे self pollination ही होगा, right? Now you tell me what is the advantage over here? What is the advantage of having such kind of flowers? Raise your hand.
Guaranteed seed set.
बताओ. हाँ वापस बोलना मिसबा.
Guaranteed seed set.
Right. So sure seed formation. Very good. Sure seed formation is going to be one of the advantage. Very true. Anything else? Anything else?
100% autogamy.
It is going to be 100% autogamy. Yeah, that is going to be 100% autogamy. There is no chance of anything else happening. Okay. Anything else? Advantage?
Protection.
Protection from wind और कुछ?
Outer factors.
Outer what? अच्छा, outer pollen grain. मिसबा बताओ.
Self pollination.
वो तो हो ही रहा है यहाँ पे, और कुछ हो ही नहीं सकता. वो तो हो ही रहा है. सेल्फ पॉलिनेशन यहाँ पे हो रहा है, वो तो हम जानते हैं. दैट इज गोइंग टू बी 100% ऑटोगैमी एंड यहाँ पे सेल्फ पॉलिनेशन आपके यहाँ पे हो ही रहा है. दैट्स फॉर श्योर. मैं बता दूं एक एडवांटेज. मैं एक चीज आपसे पूछता हूँ. यू टेल मी इफ यू हैव अ क्लिस्टोगैमस फ्लावर, डू यू हैव टू फॉर्म अ लार्ज नंबर ऑफ पोलन ग्रेन और नॉट? ज्यादा पोलन ग्रेन यहाँ पे बनाने पड़ेंगे, नहीं बनाने पड़ेंगे? अरे बताओ, अनम्यूट करके बोलो. बनाने पड़ेंगे नहीं बनाने पड़ेंगे ज्यादा पोलन ग्रेन? क्या हो गया सडनली? बच्चों को क्या हो गया? बच्चे सोच रहे हैं. अरे बोलो. Ajat,
So,
think, na Baba, think. If you have a flower which is already closed, do you actually have to make a large number of pollen grain, or even if I make 2-3 pollen grain, the things will happen because you are already in a closed condition? Tell me, what is better? What will be the advantage? You don't, you
Two
don't.
or three work.
हाँ, 2-3 होंगे pollen grain तभी काम हो जाएगा आपका वहाँ पे. You don't need to have a large number of pollen grain. Even if you have like less number of pollen grain, even have 2-3 pollen grain, that is going to be enough for you. Normally, when we make large number of pollen grain as a flower when it has to go somewhere else. यहाँ पे कहाँ जाएगा? Flower ही बंद है, कहाँ जाएगा? वो कहीं नहीं जाएगा. So याद रखना, less number of pollen grain are being produced. Less number of pollen grains are being produced. So less number of pollen grain produced. Is everyone able to understand मैं क्या कर रहा हूँ यहाँ पे? क्या ये बात सबको यहाँ पे समझ आ रही है? मैं यहाँ पे क्या बोला? I hope it's clear to all of you. हाँ, that you have to produce a less number of pollen grain. So that also means less energy expenditure. ज़्यादा energy यहाँ पे आपकी लग नहीं रही. Expenditure, right? So that is the advantage over here. But disadvantage is that you don't have a variation. All the offsprings are similar to the parent one. Okay. But advantage याद रखना. Seed formation is very much sure shot, right? Less number of pollen grain are being produced. You don't have to spend much amount of energy. You don't even have to depend on any kind of pollinators. Pollinator पे भी आपको depend नहीं करना, right? No need of pollinator over here. No need of pollinator. Everything will happen all by itself. So that is something you have to know, right? So these now do not open. हाँ जी बेटा बताइए, मंताशा बताइए क्या सवाल है आपका?
सर लेकिन हमें ये क्लेस्टोगैमस फ्लावर कहाँ यूज होते हैं, क्योंकि वो ऑलरेडी बड्स में होते हैं, तो वो कहाँ पर ज्यादा यूज होते हैं?
कहाँ पे यूज होते हैं?
मतलब उनकी हमें जरूरत क्या है?
हमें तो जरूरत नहीं है, हम तो सीख रहे कि हाउ दे रिप्रोड्यूस. तो सभी कमर्शियल इंपॉर्टेंस नहीं होता, right? And these flower also show like they are in the bud state, but they also open also. It's not like they remain in the bud state all the time, they're also open as well. But so you can find some flowers showing the cleistogamy, some flowers showing chesmogamy. So that is why you find even these example you will now see, वो आपको यहाँ पे example दिखेंगे, they are the example of a cleistogamous as well, right? देखो यहाँ पे the anther and stigma lie close to one another, right? When anther dehisces the flower bud, the pollen will come in contact with the stigma to effect the pollination. Thus, cleistogamy flower are invariably autogamous as there is no chance of cross pollen landing on the stigma, right? कोई chance नहीं होता. Cleistogamous flower assured seed set even in the absence of pollinator. Pollinator नहीं भी तभी seed set formation आपको यहाँ पे 100% आपको यहाँ पे हो जाएगा, right? So that is something you have to remember. Okay, and please again एक बार फिर बता रहा हूँ आपको यहाँ पे. Let me tell you one thing. This thing again over here. The example which you have seen over here, ना, Viola, Oxalis, Camellia, they also become the example of your like Cleistogamous flower. They also happen to become example of your Cleistogamous flower, Viola, Oxalis, and Camellia. Right? So they show two type of flowers. And that's what they are trying to tell you. चलो आगे देखते हैं. तो ये हमने यहाँ पे देखा. Then you have, depending on the source of pollen, pollination is of my 3 types. Autogamy, if a pollen grain are transferred from an anther to stigma of a same flower, the process is called as my self-pollination or autogamy. So that's something you know. Okay. Then, now let's talk about my geitonogamy. So something I've already told you about the geitonogamy here is that assume that you have a, like, assume that again, I'm just drawing this picture just to have you, so that you have a better clearance. You have one flower over here. You have one flower over here. Right? Your pollen grains are coming from this side. So assume that there's my anther over here. Right? Pollen grains are coming from here. Now these pollen grains come, they travel and they sit on the stigma of this flower, which is different but of the same plant. यहाँ पे मेरा लगा हुआ है स्टिग्मा, अज्यूम करो कि यहाँ पे मेरा स्टिग्मा लगा हुआ है कुछ इस तरीके से. This pollen grain come and they sit on the stigma of the another flower but of the same plant, right? If you find something like this happening, this is the example of my geitonogamy. So in geitonogamy, you will clearly get to see that a pollen grain are coming from a different flower but of the same plant, right? So again, it is similar to my autogamy. You don't have any genetic variation over here, right? Pollination takes place between the two flowers of a same plant. So genetically self-pollination, but ecologically or functionally cross-pollination. I can say that it is a type of my cross-pollination, but all the progenies are going to be genetically similar. You don't have any kind of variation seen over here. So that is my deuterogamy, right? So maize is an example. Maize becomes a very good example of my deuterogamy. And you can see over here, the pollen grains are actually coming and falling on the another flower, but of a same plant. That is going to be my deuterogamy. You can see over here at the bottom. Flower pollen grain निकले लेकिन कहीं दूर गए ही नहीं, पास के फ्लावर में जाके गिर गए. Okay, that's a deuterogamy. So these are the pictures of your maize. Maize is very well known to show the deuterogamy. Okay, so autogamy is now, I think autogamy is very much clear to you. I think this is something which got repeated multiple times. So this should be clear to you. Transfer of pollen grain from the anther of the stigma of the same flower. Cleistogamy, you can see over a clear flower in the case of autogamy. Our closed flower do not open at all. Anther and stigma should be lie close to each other for a pollination to occur. Synchrony in pollen release and stigma receptivity. So the time of pollen release and the time at which stigma is actively receptive should be very closely seen over here, right? And androecium and gynoecium should mature at the same time. So androecium or gynoecium same time mature, okay, they release the pollen grain and gynoecium takes up the pollen grain. So that is something can be seen in my cleistogamy, right? Deuterogamy is something we can see. You can see the picture over here. I think it's very understandable. I don't have to repeat this thing again. Same plant but different flower. Simple. Same plant, different flower, right? And now we will talk about my cross pollination. That is my xenogamy. So over here, I will get to see that I will have some pollen grain. Now here I will have some pollen grain over here, right? Which are coming from this particular flower. And now they will go and sit on the stigma of another flower. So if at all this is happening, that is my cross pollination. That's my xenogamy. That is my xenogamy. So here the genetic variation will be seen. यहाँ पे मुझे genetic variation देखने के लिए मिलेगा. I will very clearly see over here the presence of a genetic variation. Something should be clear to you. हाँ जी तनिष बताइए.
सर कोई भी पॉलन ग्रेन जैसे एक फ्लावर से निकलेगा दूसरे फ्लावर में जीनोगेमी करने के लिए, तो फिर वो हमेशा उसी पे जाता है या फिर कुछ ऐसी कंडीशंस हो सकती है कि कहीं और चला गया?
हाँ हो सकता है. समझो ये मेरा pollen grain यहाँ से निकला. There is a possibility that it will go and sit on some orange color flower, right? So if at all that happens ना, the वहाँ पे वो orange के ऊपर वो pollinate वो germinate करेगा ही नहीं. हाँ जी तनिष बताइए.
सर ऐसा भी मतलब होता है कि जैसे जिस टाइप का फ्लावर है वो अपने सेम टाइप के फ्लावर है वो दूसरे उस पे उसको परिपक्व कर सकता है पॉलिनेट?
नहीं तो हाँ, अगर आप देखो, अगर आपका दो प्लांट है, दोनों सेम स्पीशीज के हैं, तो उनके बीच में आप पॉलिनेशन करा सकते हो. उसके बीच में आपका लाइक पॉलिनेशन आपका वहाँ पे हो सकता है और आपका वहाँ पे सब कुछ जर्मिनेशन भी आपका वहाँ पे होगा. दो प्लांट है अलग अलग स्पीशीज के हैं, तो आप ये नहीं एक्सपेक्ट करोगे कि वहां का पोलन वहां पे जाके गिरा और वहां पे जाके फिर एक हाइब्रिड प्लांट बनेगा. वैसा नहीं होता. You don't find that happening in nature, right? You can make that happen in a lab, but nature में ये generally आपको होते हुए नहीं मिलता. If you just see a valley of flowers, the valley of flower में आपको अलग अलग कलर के आपको फ्लावर्स हमें मिल सकते हैं छोटे बड़े, but you don't find this hybrid formation happening कि येलो से जाके ऑरेंज पे बैठा और ऑरेंज पे मेरा वहां पे जर्मिनेट करके उसने वहां पे पोलन ट्यूब बनाया वहां पे. That is something you don't find happening. So if pollen grain comes and यहाँ से समझो कि pollen grain यहाँ से निकला रेड से, it goes and sits on another flower which is blue in color. The pollen grain will not germinate. The pollen grain is going to remain on the flower, but it won't germinate. So वैसा नहीं होता. Habit formation यहाँ पे आपका नहीं होता, nature में नहीं होता. You can make that happen in lab with certain conditions, with treating the pollen grain with certain chemicals, and you can possibly make that happen, but not in nature. You don't find happening. तनिष क्लियर हुआ डाउट?
यस सर, बट फिर जैसे इस हिसाब से तो मतलब प्लांट्स के फ्लावर्स की रिप्रोडक्शन जो है सर वो तो बहुत कम होती होगी, तो मतलब लैब में ही होते ज्यादा आर्टिफिशियली रिप्रोड्यूस कराया जाता है?
नहीं, एक सेकंड देखो. अगर मेरे फ्लावर सारे के सारे सेम स्पीशीज के हैं ना, लेट्स से यू हैव लेट्स से वन एग्जांपल है रेड कलर का रोज है, राइट? सो इफ आई हैव इन द पर्टिकुलर वैली है, पूरे गार्डन में पूरे वैली में अगर रेड कलर के रोज के कई सारे प्लांट्स हैं, तो उनके बीच तो हो जाएगा क्रॉस पोलिनेशन बिना कोई दिक्कत के, राइट? सी व्हाट हैपेंस ना तनिष, दैट ड्यूरिंग क्रॉस पोलिनेशन यू जनरली मेक अ लार्ज नंबर ऑफ पोलन ग्रेन, एंड अ मेजॉरिटी ऑफ द पोलन ग्रेन आपके पहुंचेंगे भी नहीं फ्लावर तक. वो कहीं जमीन पे जाके गिरेंगे, कहीं और डायरेक्शन में विंड चल रहा होगा वहां चले जाएंगे. दे माइट नॉट इवन रीच टू डेस्टिनेशन, बट दैट इज व्हाई फ्लावर्स मेक अ लार्ज नंबर ऑफ पोलन ग्रेन, ताकि उसे अच्छा खासा चांस मिले कि वो पोलन ग्रेन कहीं ना कहीं जाके, मतलब 1000 में से मेरे एटलीस्ट 50 पोलन ग्रेन तो सीढ़ी पे जाके गिरे, and have 15 plants getting themselves pollinated, getting themselves fertilized. बताओ।
सर ऐसा भी हो सकता है कि जैसे पोलन ग्रेन उसने समझ लो 3-4 निकाले, उसमें से एक है उसने सेल्फ पॉलिनेशन कर दी और एक ने क्रॉस पॉलिनेशन कर ली, सर ऐसा हो सकता है ना एक ही प्लांट से?
यस, ये पॉसिबिलिटी है। यस, ये हो सकता है कि मेरा पोलन ग्रेन वहां से निकला और वो जाके सेम प्लांट के दूसरे फ्लावर पे जाके गिर गया, तो सेल्फ पोलिनेशन वहां पे हो गया, और वही पोलन ग्रेन को किसी इंसेक्ट ने लेके गया दूसरे प्लांट तक, तो वहां पे जाके क्रॉस पोलिनेशन हो गया। सो यस, दैट कैन हैपन, दिस विल हैपन। बट जनरली व्हाट हैपेंस इन नेचर ना, दैट प्लांट विल ट्राई टू अवॉइड सेल्फ पोलिनेशन। विल सी दैट वो कैसे अवॉइड करता है, वो भी हम आगे देखेंगे। कोशिश करता है प्लांट टू अवॉइड द सेल्फ पोलिनेशन बिकॉज उसके कुछ डिसएडवांटेज ज्यादा होते हैं, इसलिए विल सी दैट। ठीक है, तो आई होप यहाँ तक क्लियर है।
यस।
ऑलराइट, so chasmogamus are something we know. So now we will jump onto the agents of pollination. So now let's have a look over here. So you have abiotic and abiotic agents. So now we'll discuss about, so now we have done everything in terms of the self को हमने समझ लिया. Now xenogamy के अंदर you have some pollinators which are being involved. Abiotic and biotic. Abiotic will have a wind and water. Biotic will have animal, birds, bees, insect, everything will come under the biotic wala component. So now that is something now we have to see. What is my biotic, what is my abiotic component? Right, now let's talk about my wind pollination. So when you talk about the wind pollination, now let me show you a picture first of all. So that is how you will find the flower and its stamen are going to look like. One of the best example is going to be over here as a corn. In corn you will find the wind pollination is going to be very much common over there. That's something you'll get to see. Now when you discuss wind pollination, let me tell you over here, when you discuss wind pollination, there are few things you have to know. Few things you have to understand, that if there is a flower, if there is a plant which depends on wind for pollination, that there are few things you have to remember. First of all, you have to know the flowers are going to be small. Flowers are small. So flowers over here are going to be quite small. That is something you will get to see. Second thing, no color will be seen in the flowers. So no color is observed. So dull color will be seen. So there is no need of any kind of coloration in those kind of flower. Why no color? Because you are not attracting insect. तुम insect को तो attract कर नहीं रहे वहां पे, तो क्या ही करोगे तुम color लगाने का? So you will have no color over there, right? Third thing, large number of pollen grains are produced. Large number of pollen grains are produced. So pollen grains which have been produced over here, they have been produced in a very huge number. Like you cannot even, like a large number of pollen grains have been produced. Now why large number of pollen grains are produced? Because you know majority of them will not even reach to the stigma. Many of them हवा अलग गलत चल गई, हवा उस डायरेक्शन की चलनी चाहिए थी, नॉर्थ से साउथ की, ईस्ट से वेस्ट की चल गई, तो pollen grain कहीं और चले जाएंगे. So that is why a large number of pollen grains have been formed, right? Then you will have presence of such flowers will have a presence of a feathery stigma. They are going to have a feathery stigma so that they can capture the pollen grain in the air. The stigma is going to be feathery. काफी feather जैसा stigma इनका होगा ताकि वो pollen grain को हवा में catch कर सकें. So they can capture the pollen grain in the air. गायत्री समझ आ रहे हैं यहाँ तक? गायत्री, because in between I am saying some Hindi terms. That's why. Is it clear to you, Gayatri? All right.
Yes,
And
sir.
this question goes to all of you. ठीक है? Just let me know अगर समझ नहीं आ रहा तो. So they will have a feathery stigma. That is something you will get to see. Then pollen grain are dry. Your pollen grains are going to be dry, smooth, and they are going to be like very small. So dry and smooth pollen grain are produced, which are going to be very small in size. They are going to be produced in a large number. And also remember, they will have a winged shape. Pollen grain are going to be having the winged shape. Now, when I say winged shape, that actually means they will have a shape which allows them to float in air. उनका शेप कुछ इस तरीके से होता है जिसके से वो हवा में तैर सकते हैं, लाइक कुछ ऐसा उनका वहां पे शेप होता है, so that they can actually travel along with the air, right? That is one thing. One more thing you have to know here is that flowers which depend on wind are known to have a single ovule. They are known to have a presence of a single ovule in the ovary. So single ovule is seen in the ovary. So single ovule is seen in the ovary in the flowers which depend on the wind for the pollination, right? These are the few traits you have to know. Pollen grains are dry, smooth. They are going to have a wing shape. They are going to be very small. They are produced in the large number, right? As I have mentioned, they are produced in a large number. You don't find any coloration. Flowers are going to be very small, right? They are very small and they are very compactly arranged. मतलब कई सारे flower इकट्ठा करके चिपक के रहते हैं. Many flowers will come together, will attach themselves to each other, and that is how they are going to be over there, right? And they have a feathery stigma. The plants are going to have a feathery stigma so that they can capture the pollen grain. So these are the few things you have to know, and they have a single ovule. This is what you will find in the pollination which is taking place with the help of the wind. And the flower or the plant which depend on wind for pollination are called as my anemophilous plants. Anemophilous plants. So anemophilous plants are the one which depend on wind for pollination. They are the plant which depend on the wind for pollination. So one of the example is my maize. Other example over here I can take as an example of my grasses. Grasses are a very good example. Grasses are also going to be one of the example of my anemophilous plants, right? यहाँ तक समझ आ रहा है सबको यहाँ पे? Is this clear to all of you? सब आई नहीं रहा. अच्छा, all right. ठीक है, so that should be clear to all of you. Okay, now let's have a look. Wind pollination. So transfer of pollen via wind, example corn. Then we have grasses. Feathery and sticky stigma to trap the pollen, something I've already told you. Lightweight pollen grain to be carried by the wind. Yes, that will be light in weight. Non-sticky pollen, exposed anther. Anther are going to be exposed. You can see over here the anther is going to be completely exposed in the air so that pollen grain can be very easily released, right? Flowers are not bright or colorful and do not produce nectar. Obviously, the flower will have no nectar. Now tell me something, nectar तो होगा ही नहीं. क्या flower में smell होगा या नहीं होगा? Will the flower will have smell or not? बताओ मुझे.
No.
No, sir.
नहीं होगा, नहीं होगा. क्या क्या ही करेगा वो smell generate करके? किसी को बुलाना थोड़ी उसे वहां पे. So it will have no smell or no nectar. Okay, so that is. Flower have a single ovule inside each ovary. Polar are produced in a large number as most of them might not reach the stigma. See, you're making a large number of pollen because you know as a plant that many of them will not even reach to a destination, right? Many of them will cause allergic reaction but not reach a destination. So yeah, they have been produced in a very large number. So that is something you have to know about the wind pollination. That is my anemophilous kind of plants, right? So you can see a picture of your exposed your particular stamen over here. You can very clearly see, right? And from here you will find this all the pollen grains are being released. Okay, so in major, okay, now that is something we have understood in terms of my wind pollination. That is my anemophily, right? Anemophilous plant, please remember that term, and that is called as my anemophily is my wind pollination. Now we will try to talk something in terms of the aquatic pollination. So now let me write down few things over here. Now let's talk about my pollination by my water. So let's discuss pollination by your water. Now, when we say pollination is happening by water, we have a simple term word that's my hydrophily. The term is going to be simple. You have a hydrophily. Okay, now what you have to understand here is that hydrophily means you are depending on the water for the pollination. So pollen grains are released in the water, and along with the water, they are going to travel, right? Now, there's one thing you have to understand. Hydrophily is not a single term you will find over here. Hydrophily itself will have two other terms in this. You have something known as your hypohydrophily. Hypohydrophily. That is one term you will get to see. And you have something like your epihydrophily. Epihydrophily. Now let's understand what are these two terms. Now, if the pollen grain is traveling on the surface of the water, if the pollen grain is traveling on the surface of the water, then that is called as my epihydrophily. So pollen grain is traveling. So I write over here, pollen grain is traveling is traveling on the surface of the water. On the surface of water. That is called as my epihydrophily. Right? If the pollen grain is traveling underneath the surface of water, मतलब अंदर पानी के नीचे से अगर वो ट्रैवल कर रहा है, सरफेस पे नहीं है, डीप सी डाइविंग करके वो ट्रैवल कर रहा है. If the pollen is traveling under the surface of water, is traveling. If the pollen grain here is traveling under the surface of water, that kind of pollination is called as my hypohydrophily. So in hypohydrophily, the pollen grain cannot be seen on the surface. It is traveling underneath the surface of the water column. Okay. In the epihydrophily, it is traveling on the surface of the water. So that is these are the two terms you have to know. We'll also see the examples in this, but first of all, you have to know the two terms. Epihydrophily, surface के ऊपर, hypohydrophily, underneath the surface of the water. So these are the two things. First of all, you have to know. हाँ जी तनिष्क बताइए.
सर एपीहाइड्रोफिली में जो पोलन गैस रिलीज होगा वो पहले वाटर में रिलीज होकर उसके बाद सरफेस पे आएगा, फिर सरफेस पे रिलीज होता है वो.
Okay, that's a very good question. Right. So what will happen ना? एपीहाइड्रोफिली में दो चीजें हो सकती है. या फिर आप अपने पोलन ग्रेन को पानी के सरफेस पे आप रिलीज कर रहे हो. You are releasing them on the surface of the water and then it has been traveling. In some plant like Valicineria, what will happen? The flower is in the bottom. The flower will be remain in the bottom of the pond, right? And the flower will detach. समझो पानी के अंदर नीचे फ्लावर है, अंदर पानी में एकदम नीचे फ्लावर है. It is there in the bottom. The flower will detach from the main plant, and the flower will be having the male. It will have that your anther will be there on the. It's a male flower. Then male flower will come onto the surface, and after coming onto the surface, what will happen? It will release the pollen grain. So it can be seen that it's so both the things can be seen happening over here. Sometimes we will have some flower which will release the pollen grain on the surface of the water, right? And they will travel on the surface of the water. There will be certain plants which are submerged plants. वो लोग पानी के अंदर रहते हैं. But later on, the flower will come on the surface of the water, and then the pollen grain are released onto the surface, and then they will travel to the stigma. तनिष पता चल रहा है मैं क्या कर रहा हूँ?
Yes sir.
Right. So I hope this is clear to all of you over here. Right. This is what you will be finding happening in this. हाँ जी किसका सवाल था? हाँ जी तनिष बताइए. तनिष ने इसके someone else. अच्छा कोई और है क्या? अच्छा नहीं ठीक है. So that is something should be clear to you now. So this is what you get to see. That is the first two things you have to know. We'll see the terms again in slightly more detail with the examples. Now, before moving into the aquatic plants की कहानी के अंदर एक चीज याद रखना है यहाँ पे. When we discuss plants showing hydrophily, so when we discuss plants showing hydrophily, where you depend on water for pollination, know one thing very clearly, that they will also have some traits. Here also what we'll get to see, the flowers are going to be small. Here also small flowers will be seen. अब आप लोग मुझे बताओ यहाँ पे नेक्टर होगा नहीं होगा? Will you find a nectar over here or not?
No.
अरे नो नेक्टर है. कौन आ रहा है पानी के नीचे नेक्टर खाने के लिए? कोई नहीं आ रहा. राइट. सो नो नेक्टर. No nectar will be seen over here. Will you find any kind of smell in the flowers or not?
No.
No smell. No is going underneath the water to smell something. So no odor as well. Right. So no as well. हाँ जी तनिष बताइए.
तो इसमें ये लोग सेल्फ पॉलिनेशन भी कर सकते हैं, जैसे रिलीज कर दिया वाटर में तो वो इसी के ऊपर ही चला गया.
Self pollination is rare in the hydrophilic plant, but that is also possible. That is very possible. Yes, it's not that common, but yes, you can find that happening. Self pollination is possible over here, right? कि pollen grain निकला और जाके बाजू वाले फ्लावर के अंदर ही जाके उसके स्टिग्मा पे जाके wrap हो गया. That can happen, right? Okay. Now, there's one thing you have to know. You have small flowers, you have no nectar, you don't find any kind of water. That is very understandable. Now, there's one thing you have to know. The pollen grain are thread-like. So, pollen grains are thread-like. So, they are like long thread-like pollen grains will be seen. Right? Are thread-like. Pollen grains are going to be thread-like and they will have a covering. They will have a covering which makes them unwettable. ये गीले नहीं होते. So they will have a covering of mucilaginous covering. So they have a mucilaginous covering. So it's like a sticky covering. And because of the mucilaginous covering, what will happen? They cannot get wet. ये पानी के अंदर wet नहीं होते. So याद रखना, they will have a mucilaginous covering we've seen on the pollen grain. And the pollen grain are generally going to be thread-like. So that is the kind of pollen grain you generally get to see in the hydrophily. That should be very clear to you. Okay, that's something we'll get to see. Now let's try to see. In this slide only it started writing. 1 second रुक जाओ. चलिए देखते हैं पहले. So you will find invasive aquatic plants such as water hyacinth and water lily. Now these are interesting plants. So you have a plant like my water hyacinth and you have a plant like my water lily. Now these plants, what will happen with them? Na? They will come onto the surface and they will be seen on the surface of the pond. Even like your lotus as well. Lotus sabne dekha hoga. Lotus is something you will find on the surface of the pond. Now what happens with them? Na? Someone like lotus, water hyacinth and water lily, they do not depend on water for pollination. Rather, they depend on the insect and the wind. So please understand, the flowers like my water hyacinth and water lily and even lotus, these are not flowers which depend on water for pollination. So please remember this thing. आप लोग क्या सोचोगे? What you will think that it is a water lily, then it will depend on water. It's not the case. Okay. So these flowers will come onto the surface, right? And they will open on the surface. And then you will find insect or wind will be involved over here for the pollination, just like a land plant. So याद रखना, water hyacinth, water lily are not the example of my hydrophily, right? This plant will open on the surface and then the insect are going to come, either insect or a wind, and they will help you in the pollination. So that should be clear to you. Okay. Then hydrophily is of my two types. Epihydrophily, that means the pollination will happen on the surface of the water, right? And that example over here is my Vallisneria. So Vallisneria becomes a very good example of my flower, which shows my epihydrophily. Now let me show you over here how this is going to look like. So let me show you the story of my epihydrophily. So let's come over here. See, now what will happen? Now understand this thing. This is the surface of the water. Assume that this is the surface of the water over here, right? And then you have a plant which is in the bottom. Assume that you have a plant which is there in the bottom. Okay. Now, generally, the female flower will have a very long stalk. Female flower will have a very long stalk. So assume that this is my plant. I'll just make a couple of leaves, right? It will have a very long stalk. So the female flower generally has a very long stalk. That means what? उसका एक बड़ा लंबा सा यहाँ पे stalk होगा, pedicel होगा. And because of that, what is happening now? Female flower is opening on the surface of the pond. Female flower is opening on the surface of the pond. So this is my female flower. और ये surface पे आ चुका है. ये मेरे surface है, पानी के surface के ऊपर है, right? And this green line is my पानी का surface. This is my surface of the water, right? So let me tell you this thing. This is my female flower. This is my female flower, and which has come onto the surface. Now, similarly, you'll have a male flower, male plant somewhere nearby. You'll have a male plant over here, male flower, right? And male plant will have a male flower, right? So assume that you have a male flower over here, right? So I'm just going to draw two male flower over here, right? This is my male flower. Now understand what will happen. The male flower will detach from the main plant. The male flower will detach from the male plant और वो आ जाएगा surface के ऊपर. तो यहाँ से detach होगा. It will detach from the main plant. And now what has happened? The male flower has reached onto the surface. Right? So male flower has reached to the surface. Now you know that male flower will have the anther over here. मेल फ्लावर पे यहाँ पे एंथर लगे हुए उसे मिल ही जाएंगे वहां पे. नाउ व्हाट विल हैपन, दिस मेल फ्लावर विल ट्रैवल ऑन द सरफेस टुवर्ड्स द फीमेल फ्लावर. अब वो खुद से नहीं जाता, हाँ वो ऐसा नहीं कि खुद से तैर के जा रहा होता है, इट वोंट गो बाय इटसेल्फ, but it will have like along with the wind, right, basically, or along with the water current, it will travel towards the female flower, right, travel करके आएगा वो यहाँ पे. Now understand what will happen. Now this male flower has reached towards the female flower, it has reached over here. As soon as it comes in contact with the female flower, what will happen, the anther is going to break down, the anther will dehisce. Dehiscence of the anther will be seen. So as soon as it comes in contact with the female flower, what will happen? It will release the pollen grain onto the female flower. So female flower will have the stigma over here. Female flower will have the stigma. And now what will be seen happening? The pollen grain will come out from here and will fall onto the stigma. As soon as the pollen grain falls on the stigma, as soon as the pollen grain will come and fall on the stigma, what will happen? The flower will close. Flower will get closed and will pulled back underneath the water. As soon as the pollen grains are being released, yaad rakhna, the complete flower will be pulled back into the water. The flower will be pulled back into the water. Kaam ho gaya uska. Into the water. This is a story of my Vallisneria, and Vallisneria becomes a very good example of my your epihydrophily. So this is something you have to understand. So yaad rakhna, male flower will detach from the main plant body, will come on the surface so that they can look for the female flower which has been waiting over there so that they can take up the pollen grain. So क्या ये वाली बात आप सबको यहाँ पे समझ आ रही है? Is this thing clear to all of you? बताओ.
Yes.
Tanesh को सब समझ रहा है. Misbah, I hope it's clear to you. Misbah. Yeah. All right. And Aisha as well. Aisha, I hope it's clear to you as well. Aisha and all the other people who are there. हाँ. आयशा बोला करो yes no जोर से, ठीक है.
Yes.
हाँ चलो. So that is what you find happening over here. So याद रखना, Vallisneria is a very good example. Female flower will reach on the surface over here, surface by a long stalk, and the male flower are released onto the surface of the water. Something I've just told you, right? Male flower are carried passively by water current. Some of them eventually reach the female flower. Something I've just told you, right? That is the story of your Vallisneria. So examples are, you have an example like my Vallisneria, Hydrilla, and Zoostera. These are the three examples which have been given in the hydrophily, right? Vallisneria, remember, it's an example of my epihydrophily. It's an example of my epihydrophily. Zoostera is an example of my hypohydrophily. So Zoostera becomes an example of my hypohydrophily, right? I just said over here hypo. Remember that. It is an example of my hypohydrophily. We'll see in the next slide. Do remember that very less number of flowers depend on plants, depend on the water for my pollination. So you have only 30 genera. Only 30 genera are seen which are known to depend on water for my pollination. That is very less in number. Okay. What are the adaptations? Pollen grain have a mucilaginous covering to avoid getting wet. Something I've just told you. Flowers are not brightly colored and do not produce nectar. Obviously, क्या करेंगे nectar बना के? So don't have nectar over there, right? So pollination Vallisneria, we have just seen that. I've just told you this story complete over here, right? So the male flower will go in the surface, right, and then will travel to the female flower. I've told you this. No need to repeat all those things. Pollen grain are always going to have a mucilaginous covering, right? Then you have a Zoostera. Zoostera is an example of my hypohydrophily. That means here the pollen grain will travel underneath the surface of the water. So please know this thing very clearly, that pollen grain are going to be ribbon shaped. Remember this thing, that pollen grain, what we'll get to see here is going to be ribbon shaped. So pollen grain here are going to be ribbon shaped. They can ask you this question in the statement wale question ke andar. So they are always going to be ribbon shaped. Okay. And Zoostera is also known as, seagrass. It is also known as seagrass. याद रखना, समुद्री घास भी कहते हैं. You also call them as a seagrass. Okay. चलो. In most of the water pollinated species, pollen grain are protected by mucilaginous covering, something which is getting repeated multiple times. ये अब याद रहना चाहिए. Both wind and water pollinated flowers are not very colorful, do not produce nectar. You don't have any kind of coloration over there. Okay. So here we are done with this water pollination. So now we can jump onto your entomophily. Entomophily basically means pollination now will happen with the help of the insects, right? Pollination will happen now with the help of the insects. So here the pollination will be happening with the help of the insects. So insects will be involved over here. Now here you will get to see number of characters. So here let me find the pollination by insects, and you can see the honeybee over here. Now let me just have a look. All right. Okay. Now let's talk about my entomophily. We have to remember what are the characters of the flower which depend on the insect for pollination. So we have to know them. So now let's start with one character. First of all, now you tell me, nectar होगा या नहीं होगा? Nectar production होगा नहीं होगा यहाँ पे?
होगा सर.
होगा, बिल्कुल सही. So exine is present or absent? No, exine is going to be absent. Exine is something this why you don't find in the hydrophilous plants. Okay. So yes, nectar will be seen. So nectar will be present, right? Will the flower have coloration or not?
Yes sir.
Right.
Yes, sir.
Colorful flowers will be seen over here. They will also have a fragrance, right? So fragrance can also be seen. So fragrance is also seen in the flower. You will find them flower over here, right? Flowers are generally going to be large and conspicuous. Conspicuous means what? You opposite देख सकते हो. Conspicuous means you can actually observe them. You can actually clearly see them. So that's something you'll get to see in the entomophilous flower, right? Then, along with that, what are the other things I'll get to see in this? I will find some of the flowers will have a landing site. Some flowers has a presence of a landing site. Landing site matlab kya? Landing site are those areas where the insect can come and sit. There are those areas where the insect can come and sit. These are called as my landing sites. You can find the flowers will, especially will the petals will have the landing site. So generally the flower will have, or I can separate right over the petals have landing site where actually the insect can come and actually sit over there. Okay. Then you can find over here the pollen grain will have a pollen kit. Pollen grain will have presence of a pollen kit. I think we have discussed the pollen kit. Can anyone tell me what was pollen kit by raising their hand? Pollen kit क्या था? बताइए मुझे अपना hand raise करके. Raise your hand and tell me what was my pollen kit. चलिए जल्दी फटाफट. शिखा बताइए. What was my pollen kit?
एटम प्रोड्यूस करता था पोलन किट.
वापस बोलना.
जो टिपिटम लेयर थी
हाँ.
वो प्रोड्यूस करती है पोलन.
Pollen kit बनाती है. Now what is there in the pollen kit? That's true. Now tell me what is there in the pollen kit. अच्छा, anyone else? सब लोग भूल गए. बोलो तनिष्क.
Attract insect.
अरे नहीं, ऐसे नहीं. ये तो सही नहीं है. Anything else? But I have explained you this. I have explained you pollen kit. How can you forget?
Sir, you said pollen kit we can explain after, sir.
Yeah, Gayatri, tell me what is pollen kit?
Sir, no, sir, you said that we can see pollen kit in another class set, sir.
No. But pollen kit is something I've told you. Pollen kit is something I've explained by doing the macrospore genesis. Ajay, tell me something. Haven't I told you that sometime the pollen grain, what will happen? The pollen grain will have a sticky oily secretion. Haven't we discussed that? Sticky oily yellow secretion.
Made of carotenoids.
No. Okay, now I'll tell you. Okay, so now, see, when we discuss a pollen kit, when you say pollen kit, so you should know one thing in this. And one thing is going to see what will happen sometime. A pollen grain will have oily sticky secretion of yellow color. It will have yellow color. oily secretion. ये येलो कलर का ऑयली सिक्रेशन आपको मिलता है ना पोलन ग्रेन के ऊपर, दिस विल बी सीन ऑन द पोलन ग्रेन. सो दिस येलो कलर ऑयली सिक्रेशन will be seen on the pollen grain. And this secretion, because of this secretion, what will happen now? The pollen grain will attach to the body of the insect. The pollen grain will attach to the body of the insect, and that is called as my pollen kit. So when a pollen grain will have a yellow color oily secretion, that is called as my pollen kit. Okay. And what is the advantage of pollen kit? Pollen kit ka advantage ye that this, because of this, it will get itself attached to the insect body. So that should be clear to all of you, that one of the advantages of pollen kit is going to be that you can find it will get itself attached to the surface of the insect because it is a yellow color oily secretion. So this should be clear to you. Now is this point clear to all of you? Pollen kit. क्या ये सबको पता चल रहा है यहाँ पे?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Right. Okay. ठीक है. That is my pollen kit formation. Okay. Along with that, you will also find the flower is also going to produce edible pollen grains. Edible pollen grain. That means pollen grain जो खाए जा सकते हैं. Pollen grain which can be eaten. So याद रखना, please remember this thing very clearly, that your plant is also going to produce edible pollen grain. That means, see, if insect eats 4 or 5 pollen grains, it's not a big concern. Everyone is happy, right? So plants produce a large amount of pollen grain, and if some pollen grain have been used by the insect, that's completely fine. If they have been eaten, that's completely fine. So they make the edible pollen grain so that the insect can come over there, right? So that is something you have to know. So these are the few things you have to remember over here. The nectar formation, colorful flowers, fragrance can be seen. Large and conspicuous flower are seen over here. Landing site is observed in some plants, in some flowers. Pollen kit formation can be observed, and edible pollen grain are being produced, right? Now you should also know one thing. If a flower is trying to attract flies and beetles, if a flower is trying to attract flies and beetles, flies और अगर आप beetles को attract कर रहे हो, for attracting flies and beetles, then you will have a pungent odor. You will have a pungent odor. Pungent odor means what? The smell will be not good. Smell will be not as fragrance like smell वहां पे नहीं होगा, उसका स्मेल थोड़ा खराब होगा. कोई चीज सड़ रही हो ना, if you find a meat is getting rotten, वैसा स्मेल होता है ना, वैसा स्मेल आ रहा होगा. Rotten meat, you will get a smell of a rotten meat from such flowers, right? So if you want to attract flies and beetles, such pungent odor will come out from the flower. So that is something also you should know, right? So these points has to be remembered all the time. You should know all these points. Please remember them. Okay. So now you can say endophily, pollination by my insect, right? And these points has to be remembered by you. इसको लिख लेना बाद में. Make sure you write down all those points. Okay, so that you remember all the time. So that is my entomophily over here. And now this is one of the exceptional example over here. Some plants and some, see what happens now, sometimes what will be seen happening, that some insect depend on the flower for completion of the life cycle. That means some insect will come and lay the eggs in the flower so that their babies can grow over there, right? So such example has been given in the insect, and that example has to be remembered. So you have a yucca plant. There's one example of your yucca plant. Now what happens with the yucca plant? Yucca plant and you have a yucca moth. And you have a yucca moth. So this yucca moth will come and lay the eggs in that particular plant, which has been now called as a yucca plant because of that. And now these eggs will germinate, will basically hatch out, and the larva can stay over there, and larva can feed on some seeds over there. So the life cycle of the yucca moth depends on that particular plant, which has been mentioned over here, right? So let's have a look. A similar relationship exists between the species of a moth and the plant yucca, right? Where both species, moth and the plant, cannot complete the life cycle without each other. So what will happen? The moth deposit its egg in the locule of the ovary. So moth आएगा, it will deposit the egg in the locule of the ovary, and the flower in turn gets the pollinated done by the moth. So flower को क्या फायदा हो रहा है? Pollination हो रहा है. Flower is getting the pollination done by the moth, right? The larva of the moth comes out of the egg as a seed start developing. So what will happen? The larva will come out, and larva can sometimes also feed on the seeds. But because the seed number is very high, it does not affect the plant. Plant को फायदा ही होता है. So that is something you have to understand, that you will find an example like this, that two species are dependent on each other for the completion of the life cycle. अब मुझे बताओ, now tell me, if I remove the plant from there, if I remove that yucca plant from that area, then will the moth will be able to survive? Will the moth will be able to survive in that area? The answer is no.
No.
It won't survive. उसको dependent है वो, it is dependent on that kind of plant for its survival. So that is the example you have to know over here. One more example is in some floral species, reward are providing safe place for laying eggs, something we have seen over here as well. So example is the tallest flower of Amorphellus. It's the tallest flower, and many insects will come and lay the eggs over here. So that is something you will get to see. It's the largest flower in the world, Amorphellus. Okay, so that was my entomophily. Now let's have a look at my ornithophily. Ornithophily means my pollination by birds. Pollination taking place with the help of the birds over here. Right. So now let me write some characters in this. I'll write character over here. So let me write ornithophily. And let's try to see what are the characters I'll get to see. Now you tell me, will I find bright colorful flowers or nahi?
Yes, sir.
Yes. Yes, you will have bright, colorful flowers. Be seen over here, right? Will I find good amount of nectar or not? Nectar होगा नहीं होगा?
होगा.
Yes, होगा.
होगा सर.
नेक्टर रखना पड़ेगा, because तभी तो आएगा मेरा वहां पे बर्ड घूमता हुआ, वाकई उसने क्यों ही आना है. Right, so we'll have a good amount of nectar over here. So nectar in a large amount. So nectar will be seen in a like large amount. इतना ज्यादा होता है कि आप ऐसे फ्लावर को उल्टा करोगे तब भी नेक्टर गिरेगा, इतना होता है. So large amount में nectar will see in them, right? One more thing you have to know, flowers generally will have a funnel shape. Flowers generally have funnel shape. Funnel shaped flowers can be seen in them, right? Then one thing you have to know, fragrance होगा या नहीं होगा?
नहीं.
Yes, sir.
नहीं होगा.
Yes, sir.
Scent is absent, नहीं होगा. You won't have fragrance. Now understand this thing, that you won't have fragrance because your birds cannot smell. Birds don't have a sense of smell. ये बात दिमाग में बिठा लो. Birds do not have a sense of smell, so that is why you don't have a fragrance over here. So fragrance will not be seen over here, right? So that should be clear to all of you. These are the few points you have to know, right, in this. And polar grains are polar grains stock यहाँ पे बनेंगे. That can be seen happening over there in large amounts. So these are the traits you generally find in the flowers which depend on the birds for pollination. And the common birds for pollination are going to be my hummingbird, and sunbird. They're like small birds. They're like very small birds. आपने क्या hummingbird देखा है अपने लाइफ में?
Yes.
नो सर.
नो बोलो, इंडिया में नहीं मिलता. इंडिया में hummingbird नहीं मिलता, इंडिया में sunbird मिलता है, right? So that is not something we'll find in the India. So ये जो है ना आपका, ये आपका hummingbird है, बड़ी इंडिया का नहीं है पिक्चर. Okay, so you can see like funnel shaped flower you'll get to see over here, and birds are generally going to be small. So that's something you'll find in the ornithophily. So now, brightly colored flower, nectar is seen in the large amount. Flower are going to be funnel shaped, and scent is absent in the flower. Hummingbird and sunbird are the best example of the birds which are known to carry out the pollination for the flower. So that should be clear to all of you. Then the next one is my Chiropterophily. Here the bats have been involved. Here the pollination is being done with the help of the bats. So let's see some of the traits of my Chiropterophily. Chiropterophily. So let's try to see what has been happening over here. So when you discuss the pollination by bats, you have to know that you will have a dull correlation. You will have a dull coloration. Or I could say you'll have a white color flowers, or you can have a white color flowers, right? Then nectar will be seen in a high amount. Nectar is high. So high amount of nectar will be seen over here, right? Pollen grains are large. You will find pollen grains are comparatively large in size. We'll get to see them, right? And generally these flowers are going to bloom in the night. Flowers, because see, चमगादड़ रात को active होता है. The bat is going to be active in the night time, right? So majority of the flowers
सर उसको सर और नहीं तो पहले में नहीं डाल सकते थे,
लेकिन वो ब्लूम नहीं करता ना रात को फ्लावर वहां पे. ऑर्निथोफिली के अंदर फ्लावर्स आपके ब्लूम करेंगे दिन के टाइम पे. ओके, एंड these flowers are going to be large in size as well. Okay, so they are basically dependent on the flower, dependent on the bats for pollination. See, in the night time, if a flower is blooming in the night, na, you cannot expect bird to do that. Birds are only active during the daytime. So assume that there's a plant, there's a tree which blooms in the night time, then he will depend on some other animals which are nocturnal. And bat is the example of my nocturnal animal, इसलिए उसके ऊपर depend करता है. ठीक है? And याद रखना, the flowers are going to be large. Flowers are large. तनिष्क बात समझ आ रही है मेरी?
यस सर.
ठीक है, फ्लावर्स आपके यहाँ पे काफी लार्ज होता है, and you have a leathery petals, so that sometimes even they prefer eating petals as well. That's why bats. So yeah, these are the things you have to know. You have a dull coloration. Nectar is going to be very high. Pollen grains are going to be slightly large in size. Flower is going to bloom in the night time for them, and flowers are going to be large in size. So that is something you'll find in the Chiroptera phyla. This is what you find in the flowers, which depend on the bat for my pollination. And yes, fragrance will be seen. Bat सूंघ सकता है. So yes, fragrance is seen. Fragrance is seen. So this should be clear to you, right? अब यहाँ पे हम करेंगे क्वेश्चन सॉल्व, जिसको करेंगे आप. अच्छा, क्वेश्चन सॉल्व करने के पहले फर्स्ट ऑफ ऑल, इज द पॉलिनेशन क्लियर टू ऑल ऑफ यू? यहाँ तक इज द पॉलिनेशन क्रिस्टल क्लियर टू यू यहाँ तक सबको? तो मैं एक दो सवाल पूछता हूँ, उसका पहले हैंड रेज करके आंसर देना. टेल मी what are the example of my flowers which show hypohydrophily? Raise your hand and answer this. Example of the flower which is going to show the hypohydrophily. सब लोगों ने करना चाहिए. अच्छा बताओ, गायत्री.
Zostera.
Right, and Zostera is also called as my seagrass. Also called as my seagrass. ठीक है. All right, now tell me chart traits. Tell me 4 characters of a flower which depends on the wind for pollination. 4 characters of the flower which depends on the wind for pollination. Tanishk, बताओ.
Sir, the flowers will have no color, odor, no fragrance. They will have feathery stigma, and so many pollen grains are produced at a time.
सही है. ओविल कितने होते हैं बता दो. ये भी ओविल कितने होते हैं तनिष्क उसमें?
What sir?
ओविल कितने होंगे? ओव्यूल.
So ovule एक.
Right, true. बढ़िया. Okay, now tell me 4 characters of a flower which depend on, or tell me only 2 characters of a flower which depend on, 2 or 3 characters which depend on 4 on water. वाटर वाले 4 के कैरेक्टर बताओ हैंड रेज करके. मिसबा बोलिए. मिसबा.
Flowers use long stalks to reach water.
Okay, ठीक है. That is something I can find in Vallisneria. All right, okay. और
Ribbon-like pollen.
ribbon-like pollen grain I'll get to see in Zostera. Okay, all right, ठीक है. Thread-like pollen grain. Okay. Anything else?
Hydrophily is shown around 30 genera.
That is not a character of a flower. One thing you have to tell me, what is the covering surrounding the pollen grain? Pollen grain के आसपास covering कौन सी होती है?
Mucilaginous.
Mucilaginous covering I'll be seen over there, right? So these are the traits you have to tell me about the water. बिल्कुल सही, बढ़िया. अब इसके लिए आप करेंगे यहाँ पे हैंड रेज. Attractant and reward are required for. Attractant और reward किस ग्रुप के लिए हमारे यहाँ पे हमें लगेगा? बड़ा ही आसान सा सवाल है. What are the attractant and reward are being attract कर रहे हो आप, reward दे रहे हो, this will be happening in which kind of category over here? Tell us, Shikha, बताइए क्या होगा इसका आंसर?
Sir, option A.
Option A you are telling me, and option A becomes your correct answer. Yes, endophily के अंदर you will find attractant and rewards will be seen. Right, very good. Then flower which have a single ovule in the ovary and are packed into inflorescences are usually pollinated by. So think wisely and then raise your hand. Mantasha, tell us, single ovule है यहाँ पे, बोलो.
सर ऑप्शन बी.
और इसका नाम क्या होता है? Pollination by wind को हम क्या कहते हैं? अरे अरे अरे
सर
अरे
एंटी सर
हाँ, बोलो.
एनिमोफिली.
Anemophily, right. So wind is going to be a correct answer. बहुत सही, बहुत सही, बहुत बढ़िया. ठीक है. Dioecious flowering plant prevent both. Now dioecious means a plant having either a male plant or a female plant. That's a dioecious plant. So when I say dioecious plant, I think now you should know that. When I use a term like a dioecious, male plant is separate. So you'll have a male plant which is going to be a separate one, and you'll have a female plant which is going to be a separate one. So now you know what is a dioecious. In case if you don't remember, say you should be knowing that. Now tell me, if you have a dioecious plant, then it will prevent what? क्या उसमें prevent किया जाएगा? You have a male plant and a female plant are very separate. So now you have to raise your hand and tell me what will get prevented over here. Tanishq, that's it. दो ही बच्चे कैसे चलेगा ऐसा? बोलो तनिष्क.
ऑटोगेमी एंड कीटोनोगेमी.
All right. What do you think, शिखा? क्या लग रहा है इसका आंसर?
Sir, option A.
Okay, मिसबा क्या लग रहा है?
Option C.
And option C. And गायत्री आपको?
Sir, option A, sir.
Option A, beta. Option A, right? Option A will be correct. Autogamy and geitonogamy will be avoided over here. If you have a male plant, then male plant can never do all by itself autogamy or geitonogamy. Similarly, the female plant cannot do the geitonogamy or autogamy, so this will get avoided. Xenogamy तो हो सकता है. So option A becomes my correct answer. These are all my NEET का questions, ना? Okay. So this को हम बाद में करते हैं because I have to give you the examples right now. This one, which of the following may require pollinators but genetically similar to autogamy? Now this is something you can tell me over here. Which of the following may require pollinators but is genetically similar to the autogamy? Again, a very good question. बताइए. हैंड रेस करिए सब लोग, बताइए क्या होगा इसका आंसर. गायत्री आपको भी हैंड रेस करना पड़ेगा. चलिए, आना चाहिए सबको ये. Read the question again. Which of the following may require pollinators but genetically similar to autogamy? Tell us, Mantasha, क्या होगा इसका आंसर?
सर ऑप्शन सी.
Okay, शिखा आपको क्या लग रहा है?
Sir, option C.
And Tanishq?
यस सर सी.
C is going to be a correct answer. I hope everyone is going for the option C. Yes, C is going to be a correct answer over here. Your geitonogamy is something in which you will find you may require pollinators because you're moving from one flower to another flower of the same plant. But it is similar to my autogamy. So yes, that's my geitonogamy. Right? Geitonogamy involves, now read the statement by yourself, take your 30 seconds and then tell me the answer. Geitonogamy involves. Take your 30 seconds. देख लो. Tell us, Gayatri, क्या होगा इसका आंसर?
Sir, option A.
Gayatri is saying option A. Tanish, क्या लग रहा है?
सर ए.
And Shikha?
Sir, option A.
And I'm also assuming that Misbah and Mantasha will also have option A as an answer. And the answer is going to be option A. Fertilization of a flower by a pollen from another flower of the same plant. That is your geitonogamy. Very good. Then transfer of pollen grain from the anther to the stigma of another flower of the same plant is going to be called as what? ऐसी बता दो, अनम्यूट करके ऐसी बोल दो जोर से.
Geitonogamy.
Geitonogamy.
Geitonogamy. बिल्कुल सही. Right. That's going to be geitonogamy. Then which one of the following statement is going to be correct? Now you have this 4 statement in front of you. Take your time, take your 30 seconds and tell me which statement over here is going to be correct. देख लो ध्यान से and then tell me over here. Which of the following statement over here is going to be correct? बताइए मिसबा.
Option A.
मिसबा तनिष्क आपको क्या लग रहा है?
Yes, sir. A.
Tanish, why option A? Why you are saying option A? Reason?
Sir, because the flower will remain closed, so there are no chances of xenogamy.
Right, true. Because the flower remains closed, so you'll always find it is going to be autogamous. So yes, clistogamous flower are always autogamous. That's going to be a correct statement. So yes, आप सबका आंसर यहाँ पे आपका सही है. True. Advantage of clistogamy. What is the advantage of clistogamy? Take your time. Again, it's a simple question, and then raise your hand. मंताशा बताना पड़ेगा इसका आंसर. बताओ. Advantage of clistogamy.
Sir, option A, no dependence on pollinators.
Right, you do not depend on your pollinators over here, so that's why option A over here becomes my correct answer. Yes. Right. I hope it's clear to all of you that you do not depend on the pollination over here. Right. Wind pollination is common, and I've told you this. You should be able to answer this. Take your time. Tanish, क्या होगा इसका आंसर?
Grasses.
Right. Grasses के अंदर you will find wind is going to be the source of my pollination. Yeah. Now we have to start with the new topic. I think we don't have much amount of time for the new topic, but at least we can see few things. Let's understand few things, right? Now, majority of the flowering plant produces a hermaphrodite. That means majority of the flowering plants are to be bisexual. That means a single flower will have male and female reproductive parts. Okay, and every now and then, what you will find that the anther will come out, like anther will release the pollen grains, and the pollen grain will come and sit on the stigma of the same flower. Now, what that leads to? Now, that leads to more often autogamy. So there are always going to be more chances of finding autogamy happening over here. So you'll find your flowers will be having bisexual, and if you have a bisexual flower, then there are always going to be a chances of your autogamy. So autogamy is very common. Autogamy is going to be very common. But there is a problem over here. If a plant undergoes autogamy all the time, that will decrease the reproductive capacity of the plant, and that is called as my inbreeding depression. So if a plant undergoes autogamy all the time, that will lead to a inbreeding depression. याद रखना, ज़्यादा आपने autogamy किया, ज़्यादा आपने self pollination किया, if you go for multiple times self pollination, then that can lead to an issue of your inbreeding depression. That means what? The reproductive capacity of the plant is going to get affected. Okay, so that will be seen happening over here. So this should be avoided. So understand this thing very clearly. In nature, plants will try to avoid autogamy. Plants will always try to avoid autogamy. That is what they are always going to try to avoid. They are going to try to avoid your autogamy. Okay, so this should be understood over here that the plants will always try to avoid the autogamy in this case. Now let's try to see over here how the autogamy is being avoided. Now we'll try to understand that how plants are going to ensure that autogamy is avoided. So first term is my dichogamy. अब जो मैं बता रहा हूँ उसे ध्यान से सुनो, बस ध्यान से सुनो, और अगर समझना है तो पूछ लो. If you don't understand anything, then please interrupt and ask. If you don't understand anything over here, the first term is my dichogamy. Dichogamy means what? Imagine you have a flower. Flower has an anther as well as the stigma, anther as well as the pistil. Now what will happen? Sometime in some flower, the anther is active or anther is mature. But उसी time पे, at the same time, your pistil is not ready or not receptive. So sometime can happen, the anther is active, anther is mature and going to release the pollen grain, but the pistil remaining over there, the pistil standing on that particular flower is going to be not receptive. If that is the case, then what will happen? There will be no chance of my self-pollination. There will be no chance of my self-pollination. आप मेरी बात समझिए, एक फ्लावर है, फ्लावर के अंदर you have the anther which is ready to release the pollen grain, but the stigma, sorry, the pistil over there is not receptive. That is a condition. If you find such condition, then that is the example through which you can see a flower is trying to avoid the self-pollination. क्या मैं जो कह रहा हूँ क्या आपको समझ आ रहा है? मैं कह रहा हूँ यहाँ पे जो बात समझ आ रही है आपको यहाँ पे?
Yes, sir.
बस एक नहीं है बोला. बाकी लोग क्या हो गया? बाकी लोग having your dinner right now? What is happening? देखो यहाँ पे क्या होता है. See, flowering plants have deployed many devices or adaptation or contraceptives to discourage the self pollination and to encourage the cross pollination. In some species, pollen releases and stigma receptivity are not synchronized. That means pollen grain release हो गया, लेकिन आपका वहां पे जो स्टिग्मा है वो लेने के लिए रेडी नहीं है पोलन ग्रेन को, क्योंकि वो रेडी नहीं है, इट इज नॉट रिसेप्टिव. Such condition can be called as my dichogamy. Because of this condition, you can actually avoid the self pollination. Let me just try to draw a small picture to make you understand. Assume that this is my flower, right? You have a anther over here, you have your stamen over here, right? Now they are ready to release the pollen grain. They are very much ready to release the pollen grain, but you have your pistil, and the pistil over here is not receptive. So your pistil आपका यहाँ पे, it is not receptive. वो लेने के लिए रेडी नहीं है, वो आपके पोलन ग्रेन को लेने के लिए वहां पे या जर्मिनेट करने के लिए रेडी नहीं है. If that is the condition, and on the other hand, you have an anther which is mature, you have an anther which is going to be mature. If that is the case, then what will happen? Pollen grain निकलेंगे, गिरेंगे उसके ऊपर, but you won't find any fertilization happening because your pistil is not receptive. बताइए बेटा, बताइए. Tell us, Misbah.
Sir, in this plant, Getonogamy is present.
No. So what is happening now? All the flowers will have their pistil not active, not receptive. All the plants will have all the pistil which are going to be not receptive. So there's no even chance of Getonogamy. Because if you allow Getonogamy over here, then that is not advantage for the plant. The plant will have no advantage. वो हो रहा है वापस, self pollination नहीं हो रहा है वापस से. समझ आ रही है मेरी बात? कोई फायदा ही नहीं हुआ फिर तो प्लांट को. So what will happen in such plant? Plant is bisexual. The flower is bisexual. But anther maturation will happen, and when anther gets mature and release the pollen grain, the pistil of the same flower or all the flower in the same plant are not receptive. So that is how you avoid the self pollination. Is this thing clear to all of you? क्या ये वाली बात समझ आ रही नहीं आ रही आपको?
Yes.
अच्छा, तुम लोग thumbs up देते हो क्या? अच्छा अच्छा, okay, got it. ठीक है. So that is what you will find happening over here, right? Now इसका रिवर्स भी हो सकता है. कोई बताएगा इसका रिवर्स क्या हो सकता है? Can you tell me what can be the reverse of this?
सर ये फीमेल पार्ट मैच्योर है पर मेल नहीं.
सही बात है. फीमेल मेरा रिसेप्टिव है, फीमेल मेरा वहां पे रिसेप्टिव है, बट मेरा एंथर वहां पे मैच्योर नहीं हुआ. That can also happen. That is also example of my dichogamy, right? So female is going to be receptive, but male is not receptive. So that can also happen, right? So you can see some terms over here. Now let's try to see some terms based on this. Either the pollen released before the stigma becomes receptive, that is called as my protandry. So protandry means what? The stigma is not receptive. The stigma, before the stigma becomes receptive, the pollen are released. Pollen आपने रिलीज कर दी है, स्टिग्मा वहां पे रिसेप्टिव नहीं है. So that is called as my protandry, right? Or stigma becomes receptive much before the pollen are released. Stigma receptive हो गया, लेकिन pollen release नहीं हुए अभी आपके. If that is a condition, then that is called as my protgyny. So यहाँ पे stigma ready है, ऊपर में मेरा pollen grain ready था. Okay, so that is the term you can get to see, protogyny and protandry. Right, an example can be seen. Sunflower is example of protandry, and protogynic example you have a Datura and Solana. Okay, so you should understand the term that is my dichogamy. Dichogamy term should be very much clear to all of you. ये एक बड़ा ही महत्वपूर्ण term है. Okay, now let's do one thing. Let's not go beyond this. इसके आगे हम नहीं करते, but we will solve some questions. कुछ question हम यहाँ पे solve करेंगे पहले तो. We have to do this topic. It's a very important topic. You can find mass of line coming from this. Flower never opens in. Unmute करके वैसे ही आंसर बता दो. Flower never opens in. कहाँ पे open होगा?
Clistogamy.
Right. Flower is never going to open in my clistogamy. Okay. From among the situation given below, choose the one that prevents both autogamy and getonogamy. So you have a situation in front of you. You have to tell me which is going to prevent the autogamy and getonogamy. So for this you have to raise your hand. इसके लिए हैंड रेज करना पड़ेगा, इसके लिए आंसर मैं लेसन लूंगा। कौन सी सिचुएशन के अंदर यू कैन अवॉइड द बोथ द थिंग्स? टेल अस शिखा, क्या होगा इसका आंसर?
सर ऑप्शन बी।
ऑप्शन बी यहाँ पे कह रहे हैं। मिसबा आपको क्या लग रहा है?
Option B.
Yes, option B is going to be the correct answer. If you have a dioecious plant, that means it will have either male or female plant flower. That's it, bearing only male or female flower. If you have this condition ना, इसका तो अभी अपने आंसर दिया भी था. So because of that, you will never find autogamy and heterogamy can be avoided. तो ये एक बात आपको यहाँ पे रखनी है याद. Which of the following statement is true with reference to cross pollination? Which of the statement is true with reference to cross pollination? Think carefully and then try to answer this. True, huh? True. हाँ जी, बताइए तनिष्क.
सर बी पार्ट, इट अकर्स ओनली इन यूनिसेक्सुअल.
पक्का?
यस सर.
मंताशा.
Sir, option D, it requires production of large number of pollen grains.
मिसबा.
Option D.
एंड शिखा. गायत्री नहीं है क्या क्लास में? गायत्री अच्छा थिंकिंग. शिखा बोलो.
सर ऑप्शन डी।
अब मेरी बात सुनो ध्यान से. पूछा है which of the statements will be true with reference to cross pollination? It requires a production of large number of pollen grain. That is not going to be true all the time, right? Sometimes you can have only few number of pollen grains, right? You can have only 100 pollen grains and they will be transferred with the help of the insects. So that is not a true in real sense. ये true नहीं है real sense के अंदर. Okay, that's one thing you have to know. It can fail to occur due to distance. That is also not going to be true, right? It occurs only in unisexual flowers. ये भी बात सही नहीं है, because bisexual flower can also show cross pollination. Bisexual flowers can also show a cross pollination. So that is also going to be seen happening over. Heterogamy में वही तो होता है. You have a bisexual flower and you will find that the cross pollination can be seen happening over there. ठीक है, तो यहाँ पे लिखा है it occurs only in unisexual flower. That's also not going to be true over here. It most often results in a higher yield of plants. Now that is going to be true because cross pollination can always give you variation. It can give you variation in the offspring. And because you are getting variation in the offspring, because of that, we'll say that you have a higher yield of plants can be seen. You get a higher yield of plants can be seen over there. So you get a better plants. If you are doing the cross pollination over there, you actually get to have a better plants can be seen forming over there. Why better plants? Because they have a variation in the offspring. And variation is essential for the survival of the plant with the changing environment. आपके environment में जो changes हो रहे होते हैं उसमें survive करने के लिए you need to have a variation. So that's why option A becomes my correct answer. ठीक है, चलो ये वाला. Transfer of pollen grain from anther to the stigma of another flower of a same plant. Unmute करके वैसे ही बोल दो जोर से आंसर.
ये दोनों में.
Option
Gitanogram.
Right. Then even in the absence of pollen agent, seed setting is assured. मैंने बोला था इसका एग्जांपल मैंने दिखाया, बोला था आपको. बताओ इसका आंसर क्या होगा यहाँ पे? Even in the absence of pollen agent, seed setting is assured. Seed setting assured हो रही है मतलब कौन सी कैटेगरी में आती है? हाँ बोलो, बताओ.
Option A.
Option A. Yes, Camelina is going to be a correct answer over here. Camelina मैंने आपको पहले ही बोला था. It's an example of my clistogamous flower. So seed setting अगर आपकी assured यहाँ पे, that is the example of my clistogamy. It's example of a clistogamy. That is my Camelina. Okay. याद रखना, Camelina is example. We have seen this. Then heterogamy is something we have already discussed this. Now read the statement and tell me the correct answer. Heterogamy को लेके कौन सा statement आपका यहाँ पे सही हो जाएगा? बताओ तनिष्क.
सर ए पार्ट.
Right. We have done similar kind of question and you have got this very true very quickly. Yes, option A becomes the correct answer. So these are the kind of question we have done. I will also share with you some more question based on the pollination, right? आज हमने सिर्फ किया pollination हमारे यहाँ पे. We were supposed to also cover certain part of my outbreeding devices, but in the next class what we will do the outbreeding devices and your pollen pistil interaction. अच्छा, tell me something. How many of you are available in the early morning class? कितने लोग आप में से अवेलेबल है अर्ली मॉर्निंग क्लास के लिए?
At what time?
टाइम आप बताओ, आप रख सकते हैं. If you want, we can keep it at 6 a.m. as well.
Yes sir, 6 a.m. रहूंगा मैं.
Just wait a minute. हाँ. So Gayatri, Shikha, Misbah, I hope it works for you. Morning 6 a.m.
Yes, sir.
ठीक है, thumbs up दो, पता नहीं चलता, फिर कुछ बोलोगे नहीं आप लोग एंड देन हाँ दिक्कत हो जाएगी. मंताशा बताइए, सुबह 6 बजे चलेगा?
नहीं सर, वो कॉलेज होती है.
इतने जल्दी?
हाँ सर, 7:30 से स्टार्ट है. 7